Thank you very much, Bettina, for organizing and chairing the meeting. My many thanks to AfricaLics, to all my friends and colleagues who we have worked so many years together to launch the book today. And yeah, it's really happy. And so today I'm going to share with you the findings from the book, which is a collective output from collective efforts. So I will share my screen and start the meeting because Bettina told me, yeah, I only have 20 minutes. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. I need to make it bigger. Okay, so today we are going to discuss innovation under the radar, experiences from Africa and the way forward. Innovation under the radar, which I think is a very important finding from our nearly 10 years research based on studies in the context of Africa. However, it has relevance, important relevance and implications for innovations in many countries, in many of the developing countries, especially the low-income countries, and also in some parts, even in the developed country, to understand the innovation that arise from the grassroots under the various constraints and the sources, the drivers, the sources of such innovation and its relevance for the future, especially the fourth industrial revolution. I think they are very important. They're very important. So the research not only fills a gap in the literature to understand innovation in the low-income country context, in the informal economy context, but also it will offer important policy implications for the governments and the policymakers. So today I will discuss what we have found from this study about the nature of innovation in Africa, the sources of innovation in Africa, the pathways for innovation diffusion into Africa from external world, and the emerging technologies today and the innovation in Africa, and also ask the question, can Africa leapfrog the innovation gap? And what's the way forward? So that's what I'm going to discuss today. It comes out from a book. Later, Malmo will help to launch. The title is Innovation Under the Radar, published by Cambridge University Press. So as I mentioned, the whole journey, actually it's a long journey, almost 10 years. Firstly is a 30 months, 2.5-year project on the diffusion of innovation in low-income countries. Many people call it the DLIC project. Funded by the UK's Research Council, ESRC, and the DFID, and with partnerships between Oxford, the TMCD Center of Oxford University, STEPRI in Ghana, and the UNU Merit. And this research is very productive and fruitful. We have continued our collaboration and expanded our collaboration with further funding. We have Bettina and Stipro from Tanzania joined us, and also Malmo from South Africa, Abidildon from Nigeria, and Ankindri from Kenya all joined us. So it's 8 years work, which come out in this book. So to understand innovation in Africa, if we look at the traditional indicators like number of patent application, publications, R&D expenditure, then Africa accounts less than 1% of the world's total, less than 1%. Then some people will ask, maybe they will say, some people say, oh, there is little innovation in Africa. So is it true? So this is my question, which really inspired me to start this journey. Is this true? If not, what kind of innovation taking place in Africa? And we understand in Africa and many low-income countries, we have both the formal and the informal sector. Informal sector is a very important part of the developing country. And what's the innovation in the informal sector look like? And here we realize we need a broad definition in addition to the traditional narrow R&D based definition of innovation. So we use the broad definition according to the Oslo manual, which innovation is defined to any new or significant inputs in production or process or in management or in marketing. So use the broad definition. And also in this research, we go beyond the traditional indicators and the conventional channels that we look at innovation. The conventional channels we are thinking about, the R&D labs, R&D investment, etc. So we try to go beyond this to look at innovation and search for innovation in Africa. And also we look at the whole innovation chain, not only the R&D stage, but also the innovation, adoption and adaptation stage of innovation. So it's the whole chain approach to look for innovation. That's the methodological innovation of this research. And analytical framework, in addition to understand what kind of nature are there in Africa and what's the characteristics, in particular, we look at the sources and the drivers of innovation within Africa. So we look at the role, not only the firms, but also its suppliers, customers, and also universities in the ecosystem, and also the role of the state in the national innovation system. In addition to this, we also look at how innovation are diffused from outside to Africa in an open national innovation framework. So I call it an open national innovation system, which was that I found from my research based in China. And here we look at how external knowledge diffused to Africa through trade, through global value chain, foreign direct investment, through internet, through people's flow, and through collaboration. In particular, we look at the external versus internal factors, the role of value chains, especially regional local value chain. We compare South-South and North-South knowledge transfer. And also we look at open innovation, how African firms use open innovation to overcome the constraints and create the linkages. And we also examine gender issue and also the role of digital technology in innovation in Africa. So this is a framework. Firstly, look at the findings from the research about the nature and sources of innovation. And the research, we started from Ghana, and later we expanded with the funding from European Union, expanded to Tanzania. So what we have found is that both Ghanaian firms and the Tanzanian firms report that they have produced either product or process innovation and also management innovation, a high proportion of high management and marketing innovation. So in Ghana, in both the informal sector and the formal sector, we have seen about half of the firms report that they have done something new which is new to their firm, either new products or new processes new to their firm. So this is also the case in Tanzania. Both in the formal and the informal sectors, we see firms from their self report. Also, half of the firms have done something new to their firm. Although the new to market, which are really from a groundbreaking new innovation, new to the world innovation, are only a very small proportion, like around 1%. So we see there are innovations there. However, they're mostly diffusionary innovation new to the firm, very, very small proportion new to the world. And we look at both the formal and the informal, we can see, like in the apparel industry, there are formal productions in Africa, also informal small firms in Africa. The technologies are different, and their innovations, there are differences in terms of innovations. The same for the food processing. We see the informal firm on the right and formal firm. Why? What are the motivations, for firms in Africa to innovate? A women entrepreneur told me that I survive because I innovate. So actually later, Pierre Monin and I and Giacomo, we have done a formal analysis, and we found innovation really had an important impact on the survival of the firms and the growth of the firms And however, these firms actually, they innovate under constraints. So we look at both Ghana and Tanzania, and the cost factor, which is the financial constraints, are the largest major top constraint. The second constraint is knowledge, it's a skills constraint. This is in particular for the informal firms in Tanzania. They rated nearly about 4. We ask firms to rate between 1 and 5. We can see the financial constraints are all, rated as 4, at the degree of 4, which is quite severe constraint. And secondly, followed by skills constraint. Later, there are also market constraints, etc. However, the top ones are cost and the skills. So the firms are innovate under the constraint. As a result of this, they have to innovate to survive, to grow, but face the constraints. So we see the type of innovation arise in Africa, occur in Africa, are what we call under the radar innovation. What's the under the radar innovation? Under the radar is that they are not detectable by the traditional indicators of patent, R&D expenditures, or R&D staff. If you look at those traditional indicators, they are not on the radar. They're below the radar. They're under the radar. They are learning-based, learning from customer, from imitation, from learning from doing, and learning by collaboration. So learning is a major source. And another source is individual creativity. Somebody's creativity. In Africa, we see a lot of creative people. So they do things creatively. And the third one is entrepreneurship. So entrepreneurship-driven creativity and learning-based innovation in Africa, and they are low investment. They cost very little financial investment. They are small or large in scale. Not necessarily small. They could be large in scale. And this is in comparison to the above the radar innovation, which are R&D based, large scale, heavy investment. So in the innovation in Africa, they are technological and also non-technological managerial innovation occur in Africa, because managerial innovation does not cost heavy investment in R&D lab. So that's why many entrepreneurs, they are driven by entrepreneurship, and they are adopting the management, marketing innovation. So when we do the measurement, we use both inside input side and output side indicators. In particular, we find use the non-R&D indicators from the input side, looking at the channels, various channels of learning and diffusion and creative activities. Then we can identify those innovation activities. And the drivers there, what we have found is customer demand, competition pressure to survive, entrepreneurship of the entrepreneurs in the business sector, characteristics of the infrastructure. Some innovations are forced because the electricity supply is not stable. So there are forced innovation to address this infrastructure limitation. And also inspiration of technological and knowledge spillover from trade and multinationals, and also big change in the industry like e-commerce or like mobile technology or regulatory environment change, policy push like grassroots innovation, green innovation, and social needs, some NGO driven. All factor prices, the cost is high, the entrepreneurs have to reduce the cost. And the pathways, the innovation are created. We can see customers' requirement, regional or global value chain, knowledge spillover or quality requirement, imitation in the value chain, or imitation among the peers, among competitors, or even cross-industry, on-the-job experiment or trial, or university-industry collaboration, and the knowledge transfer and spillover from FDI or trade, or diaspora, people's movement. So they are learning-based, not lab-based. There are also, we see new players from the South, especially the BRICS countries, trade and multinationals from the South. And in the study, in the survey, and what we have found is that, more than half of the companies told us that customers' requirements are very important. They are modify the product, create new products, together with the customer or in response to the customer needs, or imitate. So these are the main mechanisms and the channels, plus some creativity from skilled workers. And the main players, including the grassroots innovation, at the bottom of the pyramid, and some local firms and the multinationals from the BRICS country, from other developing countries like South China and India, they are in the middle, address the middle of the market. And also some Western multinationals and some national players, they may address the needs of the upper market in Africa. Some people assume African market is all base of the pyramid, not necessary. African market, we see some incubators or some higher end market too. So under the radar innovation, not necessary is always only the base of the pyramid. They could be addressed the higher end too, but they are not laboratory based. They cannot be captured by the traditional R&D or patent indicator. And in this process, what we have seen is universities actually, in African firms, their openness can be improved. In Ghana, firms collaborate with universities. It's not high, it's not very high compared to Tanzania, compared to China or European firms. So we only see 1%, a few, 2-3% firms have collaborations internationally, and less than 10% of the firms collaborate with other firms and the universities. But we do see Ghana introduced a new program to enhance the university and the research institutes collaboration with the firms, and we see an increase in their university industry linkage. Which was, a program led by STEPRI, our research partner. And in Tanzania, we see higher openness and the greater collaboration with universities among their firms. And also we observed the importance of regional value chains. And only 10% of the Ghanaian firms participated in local or regional or global value chain. However, nearly half of them report that they are able to produce something that otherwise the country cannot produce, which means regional value chain, collaboration and the regional value chain can enable African countries to diversify their production and their industry. They produce something new to the country. And we observed gender difference, and we all, of course, have observed the role of the state played in Africa. Later, Abidiodun and George Asegbi will talk about our research in this. And then look at the pathways of innovation diffusion from outside to Africa. We see actually in Ghana, and both Ghana and Tanzania, within the country, diffusion is a major source. It's a major source for both of them. However, for Ghana, we have seen the role played by European firms, also American firms and China and India multinationals. So they are also sources for innovation in the Ghanaian firms. And in Tanzania, it's somewhat different. Of all the foreign sources, China and India are rated the highest. So Chinese and the Indian technology has been the major external sources. And compared to Ghana, European and US firms, technology has much less influence in the innovation in Tanzania firms. And then look at the importance of various channels. What we have found is that trade and the value chain is always a very important source. And also social networks. We can see in Tanzania, among the formal firms, social networks is also a very important source. Standard is regarded an important source by the Tanzania firm too. And this is also the same in Ghana. Trade, labor mobility, social network, and standards play important role. However, foreign direct investment, foreign multinationals play a less important role in knowledge transfer, especially, for the informal sector in Ghana and especially in Tanzania. So for Tanzania, how to enhance the knowledge transfer from multinationals, I think it's a very important, it's a very important aspect for further policy focus, And so this is a regression analysis suggesting trade and the value chain has a significant positive impact, and skilled labor mobility social networks has significant positive impact, especially for new to the market innovation. And also we see internet adoption has positive significant impact for the formal firms innovation, but not informal firms. However, we have to say this is 2015 data. Today, internet, I believe, this impact may be changed because the technology progressed, And the knowledge transfer, why knowledge transfer from multinationals is low? What we later, together with George Asegbi and colleagues in STEPRI, we did an in-depth case study of 4 Chinese multinationals, 4 European multinationals in Ghana. We found there are significant knowledge transfer to local managers and workers within the multinational, but limited linkages of knowledge transfer between multinational and the local firms. The cultural barrier, language barrier, lack of local capacity, lack of local government requirement for knowledge transfer are the barriers. Again, there are policy implications. And now, because I'm aware of the time, moving forward, now we are in the fourth industrial revolution. So digital technology and innovation and innovation in Africa. What we have found from our data is that ICT has a positive, significant impact for innovation in Africa. So ICT has been an important source for external knowledge diffusion and searching and diffusion. And also we have seen the diffusion and adoption of digital innovation in Africa. The success case studies that I did with Anne Kingery is the M-Pesa case. And also now we have seen other successful case during the pandemic, like the drones or robots in Rwanda. So we see the success of M-Pesa suggests digital technology has the potential to bring leapfrog in Africa and bring revolutionary change. And there is a co-evolution of technological and institutional innovation and learning in the case of M-Pesa. However, this fourth industrial revolution, which is, brought together the breakthroughs in different aspects of technological progress, lead to convergence of technological progress and industrial revolution, which lead to digitization and also smart production and the digital economy. And this actually is a two-edged sword for the developing countries. It brings gains, efficiency gains, consumer welfare, connectivity, access, empowerment, and the improvement of the work condition. However, we also see the challenges about replacement of work, although it's slow in Africa, because currently the robots are not economically competitive to the cheap labor, but it will change. And another very important challenge is the income inequality within Africa and between Africa and the rest of the world. That's most worrying me. The increasing, if Africa do not capture the opportunity of the fourth industrial revolution, the income gap can increase between Africa and the rest of the world. Because of the digital skills, digital infrastructure, and the soft environment, there are gaps. We see significant gaps. This shows developed and developing country gap in mobile phone, internet usage. However, these developing countries data, including China, I don't know what will happen, if we put Africa or if we have developing countries without China here, the gap may be even larger. So can Africa leapfrog the innovation gap in the fourth industrial revolution? We see under the radar innovation in Africa. However, these are mostly learning-based and not science or technology-based innovation. And in the fourth industrial revolution, I think there are challenges for Africa. This under the radar of innovation can capture some of the opportunity, but will miss also some of the opportunity. So I think the way forward is that first we need to enhance local capabilities and facilitate technology transfer to Africa. We need education skills capabilities building to build local capability and absorptive capacity. We need policies to attract suitable types of FDI into Africa and encourage technology transfer. And the universities should play a more active role to aid technology transfer. We need to employ the technology, use digital technology to accelerate the knowledge transfer, and also support women entrepreneurs. Later, Abidiodon will discuss this, and also use regional value chain. And the regional value chain, we found it has benefits for diversification of industry in Africa. And also digital technology brought some opportunity to leapfrog with appropriate digital technology. We see the diffusion of mobile phone in Africa. We see the success of M-Pesa. And in the pandemic, we see drones deliver medicines to remote community. We see robots in Rwanda, in hospitals in Rwanda, and also some communities use solar-powered lights and cooks, etc. So cookers. So all this, I think, there shows there is a possibility for leapfrogging with appropriate digital technology in Africa. So policies need to enhance competencies in terms of skills, digital infrastructure, and the regulatory framework and entrepreneurial capabilities development, so that they can benefit from digital technology, because the production in digital economy is different from the mass production. So that's all from me. I'm aware of the time, so I stop here. Thank you very much. I will stop sharing.
Yeah, thank you very much, Xiaolan. I think it's justified for the keynote. You have used the, I think, extra about 8 minutes. So let me quickly invite the next speaker, Dr. Abiodun, who is going to speak about, I think, the same topic, but basically basing on gender issues. I think it will be interesting to know how innovation under the radar is connected to issues of gender. Welcome.
Yes, thank you very much. First, I want to thank Professor Fu for that nice overview of what has been done in that book. So I was opportune to contribute to the book, specifically a chapter co-written by herself, myself, and Professor Mamumuchi. That's what I'm going to be speaking to. But rather than present explicitly what has been done in that chapter, I'm going to try to give you some thoughts on how gender may or may not be connected to innovation under the radar, specifically now speaking about the African context. And I'm going to be offering some thoughts on how we can make innovation more inclusive on the continent. So I'm going to do this under 4 broad headings, starting with looking at different kinds of disparities that exist out there and why it may be interesting to focus on gender as an important phenomenon when we speak about innovation on the continent of Africa and in general under the radar. And then I'm going to pay a bit more attention to what has been done in the chapter that I co-contributed to the book, looking at 3 specific hypotheses. Of course, there's a whole bunch of hypotheses that we looked at, but for the sake of time and coherence, I've decided to isolate only 3 of them. And on the basis of these, I will offer my thoughts on what can be done to change the narrative. So, you know, one of the things that COVID-19 did to us in the world is to give us a dispassionate assessment of how ready we are to cope with different kinds of crises. And one of the things that it exposed, particularly in Africa, is our state of readiness to deal with issues of inclusion. You know, immediately we began to see that some children could not go to school because now they needed to rely on ICT for remote learning. And then it became obvious that poor access to electricity, you know, poor access to ICT and other kinds of infrastructure is a huge problem. There's also disparities in access to opportunities for entrepreneurship, opportunities for education, and so on. There are huge disparities in property rights. I mean, there are still parts of the society where, you know, there are groups of people, sometimes women, sometimes young people, who cannot own land, for example. So there's a limit to the economic opportunities that these people have because of the constraints they have from property rights. There are disparities in education, there are disparities in access to finance. So in the midst of all of these, the question then arises that why would it be interesting to focus on gender issues when we discuss innovation, knowing pretty much that there are different kinds of disparities, there are different areas where we still need to achieve inclusiveness. There are two broad reasons. One is the uniqueness of the demography. We do know, I mean, this is common knowledge that women are approximately 50% of the population in sub-Saharan Africa. So neglecting differences that we may notice in this particular demographic is not a good thing, because we will be missing out on the economic potentials of a large share of our population. All right. And then another way to look at this is the fact that the share of households that are headed by women is rapidly increasing, and the participation of women in entrepreneurship is beginning to increase. I mean, over the last decade or so, the share of women entrepreneurs in Africa has literally doubled and has overtaken participation of women in entrepreneurship in many regions of the world. And, you know, following closely on the back of that is the fact that when women lead households, they tend to spend more on welfare. So we benefit more in terms of aggregate welfare if we encourage more women entrepreneurs. And there is, in fact, considerable evidence that suggests that firms that are led by women tend to also hire more women. So if unemployment is disproportionately high among women, and we want to deal with this, one of the ways we can do this from a policy perspective is to support more women entrepreneurs who can then help us to mop up the huge unemployment among women. And, you know, this kind of speaks to one of the points I was just making. You see here that this is data from the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, which I'm sure many of us here today will be familiar with. As recently as 2017, 2018, total entrepreneurship activity. This is the share of people aged 15, I think it's 15 or 17 to 64, who have some kind of entrepreneurship activity. In sub-Saharan Africa, it's fairly larger than most of the other regions of the world. And the gap between men and women in absolute share of persons, adults, that have entrepreneurship activity is really, really small. In fact, far closer than what you will see in the Middle East and North Africa, and also in North America, as well as Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, to give a bit more insight on what might be going on regarding how gender might play a role in both firm level leadership and firm level innovation in Africa, I took a look at the latest World Bank Enterprise Survey data. This is data from 44 countries of Africa, basically covering almost the entire continent, and 40,000 firms actually interviewed at different points between 2008 and 2020. And then, you see, from this data, we see that more than 8 out of every 10 firms is led by a man. Only approximately 12% of the firms are headed by women. So this immediately shows that there's a huge gap. Even though we have a rapidly rising number of women entrepreneurs, their rise to leadership at the firm level is still heavily constrained. And the growth potentials of these firms led by women is largely smaller compared to those by men, because average full-time staff for male-led enterprises is about 90 people, and on average, about 44 persons work full-time for firms led by women. But if we disaggregate the share of these full-time staff by gender, the women tend to hire more women than the men. And in terms of innovativeness, it turns out that the firms led by women appear to be a bit more technologically innovative than men. But this is what the aggregate data shows across different countries. Now, I'm going to return to this point a bit later in the presentation when I speak about context and why this is important. So sometimes the aggregate data gives us a story, but when we step behind the data, the story could be completely different, just like Professor Fu has shown. So, off the top of this observation, we proposed 3 hypotheses to study what might be the link between gender and innovation on the continent. So on the back of this hypothesis, I want to be able to offer some thoughts on what can be done to make innovation more inclusive below the radar. The first one is that, and this is something that has been extensively studied in the innovation and entrepreneurship literature, the rate of innovation, the comparative rate of innovation between enterprises owned by men and those owned by women. And the literature overwhelmingly suggests that the firms managed by women are less innovative than those managed by men. Now, in our chapter, in the book that we are launching today, we found support for these hypotheses only for technological product and process innovation. In terms of non-technological innovation, so by the Oslo manual tradition, we measured innovation in 4 different ways: product, process, marketing, and organizational. At least this was the tradition until recently. And we found no difference in non-technological innovation. And so one may begin to wonder what might be the factors that explain this. The first one is that there is some evidence that suggests that women may be less risk prone and more risk averse than women. And then, the firms led by the men tend to appear more in the sophisticated and more complex sectors than women. And of course, there is discrimination between men and women in terms of access to resources. So for instance, if you took a group of female entrepreneurs and you took a group of male entrepreneurs and you asked them for their sources of working capital, the chances are higher that a man would have gotten money from formal sources than a woman. But why would there be no difference in terms of non-technological innovation? Because all of these factors, risk aversion, sophistication, access to resources, are more closely connected to technological innovation, as you may have heard that Professor Fu made that point. No difference in terms of non-technological innovation. And that's primarily because in terms of creativity, dexterity, ability to take decisions and all that, there is no evidence that women are worse than men. So there is really no reason to expect that in terms of marketing and organizational innovation, firms led by women will perform worse. Now, so while it may be difficult for the women to take the decision to innovate, whenever they do, they tend to be more successful by making more sales from their innovation. This is another hypothesis that is still largely debated in the literature. But what we found is that once the women decide to innovate, once firms led by women decide to innovate, they tend to be more successful. And it then speaks to policy in this sense that given that the success rate of innovation, making innovative sales, potentially making more profit is higher for women, does it not then make sense if we encourage, or if we encourage more women entrepreneurs, or if we try to close the gap between men and women in terms of entrepreneurial activity or in terms of innovation activity? And now this is the third hypothesis and the final one before I begin to offer my thoughts on way forward. The education of the entrepreneur is known to be strongly connected to the potential of their firms to innovate. So the better educated the entrepreneur is, the more likely it is for their firms to innovate and successfully too. We found that when a woman is equally educated as a man, so basically they have the same credentials, their credentials are comparable, it so happens that the firm led by the woman will be more likely to introduce a technological innovation than the man's. Holding all other factors constant. What that means in practical terms is that the returns to the education of the entrepreneur is higher for women entrepreneurs than for male entrepreneurs as far as innovation is concerned. Again, this raises the question of how do we then take this forward for practical purposes, for policy purposes. One of the things it tells us is that we need to begin to think about where are the capability gaps, where are the training gaps, where are the competence gaps between male and female entrepreneurs, between male and female innovators, and how can we close these gaps? So on the basis of the hypothesis and the background that I have made, I would like to offer some suggestions on what can be done under three broad headings. The first one is for us, the research community, the practitioner community. We try to understand innovation, but I do feel very strongly that it's now time for us to change our research paradigm, particularly when we speak about how gender connects to innovation. One of the things that is not yet well done in the literature is to look at the role that the context plays. History constrains women in a specific way, particularly on the African continent. And I'm sure that this is going to be true of almost every context that you can think about. So it's important for us in studies of gender and innovation to explore the history as well. There are societies in Africa, for instance, where women traditionally cannot own land, where women traditionally cannot own title on property of any sort. So in this kind of societies, how might these have left a legacy of discrimination over time? And it's also important to look at the role of institutions and how they condition what entrepreneurs are able to do, what innovators are able to do. There's a big role that political institutions, economic institutions, and traditional institutions play. In these particular areas, there is a huge gap out there. We just don't know what's going on enough to be able to offer solid thoughts to policymakers and practitioners. And secondly, it's now the time to reduce discrimination in education, in access to finance, in information and social network, and in access to decent employment, particularly for women entrepreneurs. This was one of the points that Xiaolan was making in her presentation earlier. It's crucial to support women entrepreneurs, not just because we have many of them or the numbers are increasing, but because we would be losing a huge, the economic potential, the skills, the benefits that we could have realized from a huge section of our population if we do otherwise. And the time is now. The gap is still there. I mean, to give you some figures off the top of my head, over the last couple of years, over the last 5 years or so, a number of enterprises, a number of startups, particularly in the digital tech space, have attained unicorn status in Africa. The majority of these are from either Nigeria or Kenya, in fact, or Ghana, all right? And then the overwhelming majority of them, particularly in the last 5 years, 85 to 90% of them have been started and are currently managed by men. So for every 5 male successful entrepreneur or startup founder who has attained unicorn status, that is the raised Series C funding, you will find only one woman. This is not the narrative we want going into the future. So for policymakers, one of the key messages that needs to ring from this discussion today and from this presentation in particular is that we need to reduce discrimination in many aspects. And then finally, it's crucial for capabilities to be accumulated, not just in research, but also in practice, capabilities for innovation, capabilities for foresight, to be able to see where technology is going and to develop the competencies rapidly enough to take advantage of these technologies. One of the questions that Professor Fu raised that I like is the fact that, if we continue to do business as usual, emphasizing non-technological innovation or leaving ourselves to, leaving the firms to make do, to just get by, how do African countries, or how does the continent, or how do latecomer economies hope to compete in the future as the technological frontier rapidly advances? So, I mean, this is one important takeaway that I would like to leave leave you with as I wrap up this presentation, that it's important to build capabilities. It's important to foresee where technology is going and to have as many firms as possible positioned to take advantage of this. So I would stop here, and then we can return to any outstanding issues during the discussion. Thank you. So I will stop sharing my slides now so that the next speaker can share.
Yeah, thank you very much. You try to keep time. May I now invite Professor Rasmus is going, I think, to share something on the bibliometric survey on innovation under the radar, comparing low and middle income countries, something like that. But I will get from him exactly what he's going to present.
Sorry, program administrator, isn't it fair for audience to ask questions after a presentation? I don't know, I'm just asking.
Pardon? Because of time, sorry, of course that would have been a better way, but because of time, we decided to put all the questions at the end to kind of save time. People should just note questions. Of course, there is a benefit also in doing that, because sometimes a question on one presentation can actually be answered or even changed in nature by another presentation. Sorry for that. Rasmus?
Yes. I hope that you hear me, everybody, and see the screen. My name is Rasmus Lehmer. I'm from the business school at Aalborg University. And I've been along on the AfricaLics journey since the very beginning. So I'm very happy to be invited to speak in this webinar series and in this specific one we have today in particular. So I will be talking about research on innovation in developing countries, what's captured by the radar. So this question about what is below the radar, what is on the radar, very much depends on what radar we choose to use, what radar we are talking about. And what I will be presenting now is an insight from a literature review that I've been doing with colleagues using the Web of Sciences as our particular radar. And I want to use I want to give you a glimpse of our results and use that as a basis of raising some high-level questions for this community. It's a paper that I've been writing together with Erica Kramer-Mbula. I think many of you in this webinar know Erica, and also Maria Rakas, who recently completed her PhD with us at Aalborg University. It's work in progress, so I'm looking forward to your questions and comments after the presentation. So the background for this paper is that the journal Innovation and Development has a 10-year birthday coming up. So there's a special issue underway celebrating that birthday and using the occasion to discuss issues for our community about the state of our research community and where it is headed and where it should be heading. So as a part of an input to that special issue, we've submitted this paper, and we have basically taken a point of departure in an existing paper that was written 10 years ago by Joe Lawrenson. So many of you might know this paper. It's published in the African Journal of Science, Technology, Innovation and Development. At that time, surveying low-income countries and innovation in low-income countries. So we wanted to extend this paper, extending the timeline, of course, moving from 2010 when this paper was written and up until 2019. And then we also use some new methods. We use LDA topic modeling to scan this extremely wide body of work, of literature. And the LDA topic modeling basically looks for key terms in the paper, so in the titles, in the abstracts, and keywords, and then tries to group these together to see where are there some thematic clusters in the overall body of literature. And also, different from what Joe Lawrenson did, we try to compare the research on low and lower middle income countries with that on upper middle income countries to see what we can learn from that. And I mean, the context, the key issues here is that if we take the below the radar book, which has just been published now and we are celebrating here today, that is actually a book which is very rare. When we surveyed the literature, we found a precursor to what is now chapter 2 in the Xiaolan Fu book, which is trying to draw out what is really the key issues when it comes to innovation patterns, specifically in low and middle income countries. And that paper is only among a very small handful of papers. So our body of knowledge on this is very limited. And this is also what was shown by the Lawrenson paper, showing that the knowledge gaps that were significant because poor countries were very marginalized in the overall literature on innovation. So a point of departure, the key question here was to what extent and how has this changed, if at all? So the specific research question is, how has the literature evolved over the last 10 years compared to the first 10 years? Are there any themes that are distinctive to lower middle income countries as compared to the upper middle income countries? And are there lessons relevant for us? And here today, us, I'm talking about AfricaLics research community. And it's important in this discussion to make this distinction between research on innovation in developing countries, which is basically what we are surveying. And on the other hand, innovation and development, because innovation and development has some kind of core in terms of concepts and frameworks. So what you're looking at now is a first sort result of our exercise. And as you can see, we have used the World Bank definitions of different countries. So the different colors here, we have low income countries, the orange, low and middle income countries together, the blue, lower middle income countries, the gray, and so on and so forth. So upper middle income countries is the yellow. And then we have also some what we call unassigned papers. And the reason why we have these unassigned is basically what we did is we searched for the term innovation, and then we searched for the country term for all the countries belonging in these World Bank country classifications. So the not assigned ones, the top ones, are papers that would be talking about developing countries, low income countries, and so on, without mentioning any specific countries. So of course, what you can see is that the literature has really grown a lot in the last 10 years as compared to the first 10 years. Of course, the vast majority of the literature is on upper middle income countries. So the yellow here. If we look at low income countries, the orange, we can see that it's still quite marginal. It is now a little bit on the radar, low and middle income countries a bit more on the radar, but of course, as a proportion of the overall literature on developing countries, it's still marginal, not to speak of how it's represented in the overall literature, global literature on innovation. For some reason, the computer isn't reacting.
No?
Yeah, okay. So what we have here is basically still using the Web of Sciences categories, is some of the changes in the disciplinary orientations of the literature that we have found. And what we can see is that management, economics, and business is still dominant. And this is where we would find some of the literature in innovation studies, mainly in these categories. It's still dominant, but it has been declining from the first 10 years to the second 10 years, so the blue to the orange. On the other hand, we can see that some new disciplines, and in particular, those that are related to environmental studies, environmental sciences, have really grown from the first 10 years to the second 10 years. Development studies is declining, so that's also interesting to note. In terms of the innovation studies literature, by manual inspection, you cannot, there's no category in Web of Sciences called innovation studies, but looking at the body of literature, the key references, the top-cited references, you can see that there are some, what we would define as innovation studies articles in there, but they are really marginal in the overall body of literature. So this is the first type of topic modeling result that we have. And that is based on the overall corpus of 10,000 papers, more than 10,000 papers. Feeding into to the machine all of these 10,000 papers and asking it to identify the common patterns, we of course, here you can ask it to define 100 groups or 3 groups. We decided to do 8 groups. When we do that, this is what comes out. And basically, you get a list of all the literature in that group, and then you get a list of 20 key terms in that group. So basically, it has been our task to try to give some headings that can make sense. And then look into what is inside these different groups. And of course, I can just give a very quick glimpse of all of this. One thing which is interesting to note is the very steep rise of the work on energy, energy systems, which is the square to the left, second square from the left. We can also see that literature, for instance, on innovation, management performance, so business school type topics are also on the rise. It's interesting to note that, for instance, agriculture and health in this grouping is lumped together. And what is also extremely important in terms of interpreting what comes out of our exercise is that there's a very big bias in terms of papers on China. So if we take the last year of observation, 2019, more than half, 55% of those papers published in the entire corpus were on China. So I think some of the results that we see, for instance, on energy systems is really driven by a huge interest in those topics in China in particular. Okay, so then we did the same exercise. We did that, but not for the entire corpus of 10,000 papers, but for the subset of papers on low-income countries and lower middle-income countries. And that then comes out with these 8 groups. as you can see, they are quite different from if you run the exercise on the entire corpus. So for instance, you see some themes are more visible here. For instance, on civil society and social development. And looking into that group, it's quite apparent that there are some interesting work there in terms of grassroots innovation, social forms of innovation, and so on, that isn't as dominant in the entire corpus of work. It's also quite interesting to note that rather than lumping agriculture and health together in one group, they are now separated out as separate groups, reflecting the very important role of these sectors in lower and middle income countries. It's also interesting to note that when you compare some of the particular papers in these groups, the way that it sort of treats these issues, for instance, on health, is that it treats it in a different way, with much more focused on access to health services and so on, as compared to more sort of conventional patent-based work and so on in the entire corpus. Basically, looking across this literature on the low and middle income countries, it's quite apparent that it's still a very fragmented body of literature. It's not that these reflect a common theoretical basis, a common research agenda. That would also be too much to ask. But it's quite apparent that some of the tools and some of the insights that usually are there from innovation studies are not very visible in at least in the top cited papers in these groups. So our understanding of the innovation process, as we would usually look at it, is not there in the literature. Yes. So now to some of the conclusions in two parts. Well, the first basic conclusion here is that only small changes have happened the last 10 years. As I mentioned, there is some visibility now of low-income countries overall, but basically it's still quite weak. So, extending from what was mentioned by Xiaolan, that actually there's a lot of innovation going on in these countries, we can say that at least from the perspective of this exercise using Web of Science, there's still a lot of innovation activity that goes below the radar. So it's quite apparent that the representation in this literature is really by income levels rather than by the size of the country or population levels. So the radar, if we look at this radar, there's still few and weakly appearing glimpses on the monitor. I would say, to put it this way, the radar is broken, and we need some radar technicians. Of course, one thing in this respect is just to do with the bias in the Web of Science, and how we could use alternative methods to try to look at all the literature that goes below the radar in that one. So for instance, Google Scholar would be a much more useful way to capture a broader diversity of innovation patterns, but it's not possible to use that. So this is something for the Web of Sciences to consider how that can be changed. Much more broadly, and a much bigger task is, of course, how the global publishing game is also skewed with huge inequalities in that game. And then lastly, even if the radar is broken, as I've suggested here, our insight or our analysis suggests that there are actually some specific patterns when we look just at the low and middle income countries. So for instance, these sort of sectors with respect to health, agriculture, civil society, and so on appears much more prominently. And of course here, as I say on the slide, we just scratched the surface, but these are important insights also for our research community. And on that basis, I just want to make 3 more points. I will try to be quick. So I just want to make a few points in terms of what are the implications for this review of the community. And basically, I think one kind of missed opportunity is there because we, as an innovation studies community, we have a conventional manufacturing bias. So a lot of our work comes with that manufacturing lens. And from that perspective, we are quite ill-equipped to connect to some of these very important for the African continent, for instance, sectors that I mentioned. And I think also in some of the literature that we draw upon, there's a very stark focus on diffusion absorption from the outside. Not to say that global knowledge sources are unimportant in our context, of course not, but some of the frameworks we use, they have an overt attention on diffusion from the outside and talks about framework conditions on that from that, rather than talking about what goes on the ground in terms of indigenous innovation, as the Chinese would put it. So a question here is some of these frameworks, how much mileage is left in these frameworks? They're typically frameworks developed on the basis of high-income country experiences and then applied in low-income countries. And at least my experience of being in the network over the last 10 years is that this comes with severe limitations, problems of applying those frameworks, and also just frameworks that are quite ill-equipped. So from my perspective, I think there's a need to strengthen the theoretical core of our community, use that strengthened core to reach out to some of those literatures that I identified. And I think that basically a more systematic research effort on poor countries and the marginalized could then guide building of grounded theories. So this is my question for the AfricaLics research community, whether this could be one of the key missions for our work going forward. So that's all for me, and sorry for going over time.
Let me go ahead to invite Dr. Esekbe to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Katrina. And I'm speaking on the role of the state in innovation in Africa. I would like to go through, next slide, please, these outline after introductions, TISA 2024 SDG 9, and then I'll get to the issues of under the radar innovations and onto the radar innovations, and with reference in particular to the book that Professor Fu has put down for launching. Then I would zero into the specific role of government and the instrumentality of policy, and then I will conclude. Next slide. Let me start from my country, and I'm starting with my country quoting a portion of our constitution that says that, and let me read it, the state shall, in particular, take all necessary steps to establish a sound and healthy economy whose underlying principles shall include affording ample opportunity for individual initiative and creativity in economic activities and fostering an enabling environment for a pronounced role of the private sector in the economy. And of course, when I use the term, or when the Constitution uses the term private sector, it's all inclusive. Formal and informal private sector actors are being highlighted here. Next slide, please. And so when we go to the continental level and we zero in on the STI policy document, specifically the Science, Technology, and Innovation Strategy for Africa document, we highlight these points made, that an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa, and Africa driven and managed by the citizens, representing a dynamic force in the international arena. In fact, the whole gist of it is what is in the mission, bullet 3, that we accelerate Africa's transition to an innovative. And I believe, therefore, that in almost every constitution on the continent, you find that there is a statement there that underscores the importance of innovation in terms of the initiatives and creativities that the people bring up. But here, under the radar, we are more about those innovations, the creative forces that are active in the informal sector and those that are fairly on the margins of the hardcore economics of our countries. Next slide, please. And so, next slide, please. I also would want to, sorry, the previous slide. I just want to also make reference to the fact that at the global level, this awareness for ensuring innovation across all the levels of economic activities also comes into play. And so Sustainable Development Goal 9 is about industry, it's about innovation, and of course also about infrastructure. But the more important point I want to make here is that making reference to SDG just highlights the need and the efforts we need to bring into building resilient infrastructures, promoting sustainable industrialization, and fostering innovation at all levels. Next slide, please. And so if we want to zero in on the under the radar innovations, what I want us to bring our minds to is looking at the various sectors of the economy and asking ourselves, what are these kinds of innovations? Indeed, when Prof. Fu came together and we went into the firms and tried to examine what kinds of innovations are being used there, even at this rudimentary level, are able to come up with what you may term the survival innovation that would ensure that the business still thrives. But I want to broaden what we saw in terms of what we might have seen in the agricultural sector. In the agricultural sector, you are likely to come across the very basic technologies that now we are terming climate smart technologies, ecological systems, innovations, and then moving across the agricultural value chain, you are likely to see the smallholder processes in terms of the traditional foods, nutrition enhancers, local beverages. And in fact, some of the firms that we examined, we saw that their whole basis of operation will remember the Shito processing company, the Home Foods that we found. And this firm has been able to just base its operations on this, and it's been able to connect with established fast food joints. So again, I'm saying that if you are talking about under the radar innovations, you are talking about those kinds of innovations that are able to sustain small, and in fact, even micro, small entrepreneurs in their economic activities. And the same applies if you extend into the housing sector and the healthcare and well-being sector. And in the healthcare industry, I particularly like to highlight the herbal medicinal products. We did a study there, and it's interesting how traditional herbal medicine has advanced and has established its own value chain within the health sector. Next slide. And so the question for me is that if we are talking about the role of government, to what extent can government ensure that these kinds of innovations that we are talking about, these kinds of innovations that connect with, at times with our cultural heritage, gets amplified and promoted such that probably we can also make a contribution to the global innovation value chain. And I'm saying that these bullets that I have placed on my slide are the instruments by which the role of governments will be addressed in the innovation cycle. So we have technology promotion, and technology promotion means that we would need to go into the various sectors of the economy and actively promote with policies that are spelled out by governments and also implemented by them. And here, if you look on the slide, that brings together the circles of public sector, social needs, private sector, cultural heritage. We are saying that in all of these, there are interconnections, and it is for government to ensure that there is the necessary interactions across these, so we'll be able to promote the kinds of innovations that are under the radar, but in the promotion process, we bring them onto the radar. And so access interactions are paramount, and policies should drive towards doing this. Markets are important because it's in markets that we have the end products of innovation bringing value to the innovator. And it's important that we promote access and we expand markets by the instrumentality of the policies that government implements. Funding supports are important, skills development are important, and in the presentation, we were being told that building capabilities is one sure way of promoting on the radar innovations, and I want to stress that. The policy cycle is something that we need to pay attention to, and when I say we, in actual fact, I'm referring to government. Government needs to consistently pay attention to the policy cycle and be asking questions as to whether indeed at any point in time, the policies that are formulated and implemented reflect what ought to be, given the context that we find ourselves. And I'm saying this because in the study that we did yes, there are policies put in place, and the implementation does not connect with the entrepreneurs for whom the policies were made. And it is something that a simple review and also going to the next of monitoring and evaluation would have enabled us to address sufficiently. And in all these, again, I'm stressing connections between sectors and also the interactions amongst the actors in the various sectors are paramount to enable the government address it so effectively. Next slide. And so I would like to be concluding, and in the conclusion, I'm saying that governments have important roles to play in promoting innovation and in promoting onto the radar. It does not mean that we are elevating innovations above the levels of micro and small. Of course, if you move those innovations above their level, then what it means is that you really are driving them out of business. What for me is important is that we are promoting these innovations so they can be more effectively used in the economic activities for which they have been produced. And I like to emphasize the fact that the key to promoting innovations, on the radar innovations, is ensuring that the policy cycle work effectively. We are formulating and implementing appropriate policies to ensure promotion of the innovations, to ensure that the enabling environment is created for the innovations to be adopted and used. And when you look at the core elements in that policy formulation and implementation, we are saying that there is the emphasis on technology promotion, business support, skills development, market access, and so on and so forth. And so the government does have a role, and this role can be addressed effectively with the appropriate policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Exekbe. You are actually more or less on the time. Dear participant, we are very few minutes away from the Q and A answers, session. So just bear with us. Let us launch the book. It's something that is very brief. Professor Mamo, if you can do it in less than 5 minutes, you'll do me a favor, please, so that we move to the last and enjoy ourselves with addressing the questions that have been raised. The very interesting questions actually have been coming through. Mamo?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. It was, I really like to appreciate all of you for making this interesting presentation. I wish you had more time so that you could have, we could discuss more, but new ideas have come now very well. You know, innovation under the radar, innovation from under radar to both above the radar and on the radar. So, but then again, also the key issues that have come is quite interesting, is that now there is some new impact on the entire innovation world, because we now have the virtual world, the virtual universe, as well as the physical universe. Now the physical universe is going down. The virtual universe is scaling up. It may be even becoming more infinite. Then if that happens, how do we, all the things we have created, all the languages, all the development ideas, the economics, everything we've created is not when the virtual world was there. We created it when it was all the physical world was existing, and that relationships and all the challenges we face, all the development issues. All right, the first industrial revolution, the second industrial revolution, the third industrial revolution. Now we are in the fourth and the fifth industrial revolution. Now, what I'm suggesting to you is in what way can we, this impact on innovation, does it make us rethink the whole innovation, how to unthink, to rethink, unlearn, to relearn it, so that we can actually reformulate, reconceptualize, redefine, and re-identify the entire innovation concept? Is it possible, like I like to suggest that to you, that if that happens, how would this now come to the book? Is now well done, very good book. But then if we want to continue it, in other words, my suggestion to all of you is we should have the research that continues, not is stopped just once, but let's address the gender issue. How do we go beyond gender? The climate issue, how do we go climate? Now, how do we go, before we used to have agriculture, manufacture, and services. Now, in this digital time, the whole technology is boundaryless. So how do we go to this? And then, of course, now we have poverty, unemployment, and inequality. How do we also address these social challenges? So if we have to rethink all these things in a very interesting way, with systematic, effective approaches, with new conceptual ideas and frames and theories, how do we go about doing them? That's mainly the main idea and notion I have. I unfortunately don't have the book, but I have I have for you to see the book and the chapters. I just made a photocopy from my office, so and then just for you to see it. But I must congratulate Professor Xiaolan Fu. She's a really great sister. I hope that's okay.
Well, that's very fine. Thank you very much, Mamo. What you are suggesting actually that we need to write a book about all those issues that we have been. But seriously, I think we should also write, Xiaolan, a book about African experience in innovation above the radar. There could be some issues, very interesting issues. Thank you very much. And now this is the session we've been waiting for. Sorry that it has come a bit too late towards the end, but I think we have captured all the questions. And I don't know how we can go about this. I have some questions that I have recorded myself, but I'm not sure whether I have captured all the questions. So what I do is just, I will read the questions that I have captured, and maybe we start with 2 questions first, 2 or 3, to people to respond, and then 3 more, and then maybe we can allow people, if anybody needs to raise a question, these are the questions that I captured from the chat, but people can verbally actually raise questions. So one question, the first question, I'm not very sure the first question is how is ICT defined? And this was actually targeted to Professor Fu. So I don't know whether it is the long form of ICT or Prof, can you say something about that? I don't know this person, whether it's wanting to say what is ICT, information and communication technology, or what exactly is information and communication technology is. So it's not very clear.
Yeah, so information and communication technology at the time that we were studying, carrying out the study, mainly refers to various communication and information provision technology like landline telephone, internet connection, and also mobile phone connection. Of course, even now, the main communication technologies are still this mobile phone or internet or landline, although now we have the social networks or digital platforms, etc. But they all have to based on a mobile phone or broadband. So the basic technology is still the information and the communication technology, and now we have other forms of digital technology which are kind of built upon this infrastructure. So at the time when we were carrying out study, mainly refers to mobile phone technology, internet broadband, and also landline technologies. The firms use this to access information for supply or market or technology, etc., or finance various information and the knowledge.
Thank you very much. The second question, please be a bit brief. We have many questions and I wish we could just respond to all the questions.
Yeah.
And there is somebody raised what is the difference under the radar? And I think this is also something that was raised by Mamo, the difference between under the radar and below the radar. I think it's the same thing, or just a quick response. Is it the same thing? Below the radar and under the radar?
Below the radar and under the radar, they're the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, the same thing. Thank you very much. And there is this interesting question. I think it was also the question to you, but anybody else can actually respond to. All the presenters are actually capable of responding to this question. It's a bit interesting. Somebody was asking, I think in one of the presentation, I don't know whether it is a professor in the keynote, that you are saying sources of new innovation. And one source is customer. So the person is asking, where do the customer get the new? I don't know whether you understand. I got it that where the idea.
And this idea could be, the customer in the country or in the foreign market. And could be a wholesaler, could be an individual customer. They have either some new needs, or they want some improvements in the quality, or they have seen something new and wonder you can do the same too. So all this, actually this customer's inspiration has been a very important source for innovation, not only for Africa, but for Europe, for US too. This the customer demand pool is a very important one. Even people talk about co-production with customer.
Yeah, thank you. I think also the play between, the debate about the linear models, the push and the pull, they actually work together. They push a new innovation can actually, even make the customers, the new customers. So it's actually the coupling between the push and the pull.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So another question was, somebody was asking, what does culture and tradition play in innovation? This is the question that was, I think it was during the presentation by Abiodun.
Yes, it's definitely a relevant one, and I would like to say that very quickly that culture, tradition, they do play a specific kind of role, and it's as far as contextualizing innovation goes, it's all about culture, it's all about tradition. So whether something new is going to be acceptable in a particular context and all that. Of course, culture and tradition also influences the rate and direction of the development of technology. For instance, there are certain things that you cannot sell in certain contexts, okay? So that's one part of it, looking at it from the demand side. From the supply side, there is the kind of capabilities that will be available depending on what the culture, what the tradition dictates. In some contexts, there are some kinds of professions that women cannot take or that men cannot take, and so on and so forth. So this kind of cultural and traditional stereotypes tend to influence the rate and direction of innovation. And then at the meso and macro level, traditional institutions tend to condition governance of innovation in a specific way. How institutions interact, how stakeholders interact, how relevant actors within the local innovation system interact. Culture and tradition can influence, all of this. So I mean, to put it in a very simplistic form, that would be some of the things I would identify as the roles of culture and tradition in influencing innovation. And this is true whether you think about under the radar or above the radar.
Thank you. I think that is an adequate. This is the list that I captured, but there's still a lot. Maybe I should allow people to actually raise questions. I was not able to actually sort all of the questions. Some are just comments. So anybody, can you raise
his hand?
Yes, please raise hands if you want to ask a question.
Vitrina, I've sent questions to your private box, all the questions together, so you can check.
Can you read them? It's also okay if you read them.
Am I allowed to ask a question in the meantime? I thought it was very interesting to see when you had the slide on the sources of technologies or sources of knowledge for innovation, you showed that there was a lot of domestic sourcing of knowledge. I thought that was an interesting point in itself. I also thought it was interesting to see that when it comes to global sources of knowledge, there was a predominance of China and India sources of knowledge and technology. I can't remember how exactly you phrased the question, but I was wondering whether you have any thoughts on the basis of your work on sort of the pros and cons of technology from different sources. Of course, you can have a hypothesis about appropriate technology as you had, and that might work very well in simple products. But once we have more complex products with services, maybe finance and so on, it's very difficult to say whether there's a South-South benefit or not.
Thank you, Rasmus. That's a very good question too. I think, yes, in both Tanzania and Ghana, domestic sources have been a major source of innovation for the local firms. Although they can come from customer, which is a major one, and competitors and also suppliers, etc. However, I think there is a space for African firms to open up, use the digital technology to really open up and see further beyond their own country on the continent, whether there are new ideas could be used for them, and also in the world, other places, either north or south, could be things for them. And the digital technology can provide the tool. And I visited Ghana in a small kind of apparel workshop. And the manager told me that he's choosing all the sewing machine on the phone online, finding which one is most value for money and meets the function. So I think that's about the sources. And also, actually, in Ghana, European firms is the major source of external innovative idea source. And in Tanzania, we found China and India, the major one. And actually, they are different. They are different. Where our research together with George Asagby found out that, like, in terms of knowledge diffusion in the multinationals, again, the culture come in. And we found the multinationals in European multinationals, they are more decentralized kind of social network, business connection, and they empowered the middle and the higher rank managers. But for the blue collar workers, they benefit more from the Chinese multinationals because more intensive interaction and more hands-on mentoring. And for those, blue collar workers without much training before, they benefit from more intensive supervision. And also knowledge in terms of appropriateness, like in the sewing machine apparel industry, the case is that entrepreneur manager told me they found the Chinese sewing machine, although the quality not as good as the Siemens or Brother brand. However, their price is around 1/3 or a quarter of the European or Japanese sewing machine. The lower price allows them to get onto the ladder. and they can start to run the business and earning money and gradually, you know, upgrade. So this technology from the south easier to be grasped by the local workers, and also allow them to easier to get onto the ladder and support them to upgrading. One day they will be, you know, get the scale and afford a Siemens or brother branded sewing machine, but the Chinese machine give them the ladder and to upgrade. I think this appropriate technology become, you know, a factor to in our comparison.
Thank you very much for that very concise response. There is this also this question on, it says, kindly, I don't know, I think it is Xiaolan or somebody else, kindly share more information on how we could improve collaboration for firms along the regional value chains, even as many firms are now looking internally and closer to meet their supply chain needs after the global pandemic.
I think this is a very important question too. A regional value chain from our study found very important to help the firms to lower the cost and also produce something that is too complicated that one firm cannot produce on their own. And so this leads to the diversification of the industry, but to formation of the collaboration and also to especially a production chain, I think a lead firm is very important. So, you know, the government support for the lead firms be able to coordinate the local suppliers and also the customers. I think that needs some support. Second is about information. Like in the UK and the US, people were talking about innovation platforms. In the UK, there is a Catapult. Actually, it's Industry Research Institute and the universities kind of network, consortium. And in China, also now they are talking about a new innovation institute, new type of innovation institute. It's not a research institute, it's more like a in sectoral research coalition between firms, research institutes, and the universities. So I think that's another area that African countries' government can do. Use policies to encourage the networking. So this is not old-fashioned industrial policy. People won't say you are doing subsidy. However, this provide information, provide some funding support for the networking, and support the firms and the research institute and universities in the network to produce something new to the country at least. And also universities can help the firms to assimilate the transfer technology. That's what I found in China in the first 30 years. Universities play such an important role, not only just to create new knowledge, really work with the firms to absorb and make adaptation of the transferred knowledge. So Wu Xiaobo call it secondary innovation in Chinese terms. However, purely rely on firms may not be enough. Research institutes and universities can work together. And this can help African firms to build up more collaboration. So information in provision, network, platform support, and some funding support to leverage the network.
Thank you very much. There is this interesting question. We have about 3 minutes. I don't know whether we can, there are still some more questions. I don't know whether we can extend the time a bit. But meanwhile, we are thinking about that. There is this question, I think it came from Rasmus. I don't know whether I got it right, but I'm giving it back to you, Rasmus, because you are the board member of AfricaLics. Is the role of AfricaLics theory making? Did you ask that question?
I think Rasmus raised very important question. I don't know whether just 1 minute. I think what Maomu asked, what's next from the book? I think it's very important. And also Rasmus mentioned how we should further in our innovation research to capture the under the radar innovation taking place in the developing countries, recognize the creativeness. I think it's important. So people won't say developing countries are not innovative. They are innovative in a different way. And also how to move on to the on the radar. I think it's another next step. While we recognize some of the good aspects of the under the radar innovation, because it's inclusive, sometimes it's environmentally friendly, and also it's efficient in the local context. So recognize the advantages of the under the radar innovation, while move on to the above the radar, on the radar, to benefit, especially the fourth industrial revolution, because all the digitals, all those things. Yeah. So I stop here.
Thank you. So do we still need to directly respond to this question, the role of AfricaLics, whether it is theory making? I don't know whether I got the question well, but you know.
Can I respond?
What I can say, maybe let me try, but we can discuss. This is a very important question. You know, theory, and for me, I always say, I think even George can also help with, because he is also an expert on policy. Policy and theory actually are two sides of the same coin, you know, because when you are making policy, you need evidence, and that evidence comes from research, and research always uses what? Theory. So I think the role of AfricaLics is, in a way, is true, that AfricaLics to a large extent should be testing theories. You know, most of the innovation theories that we have are from developed countries, and to be used in Africa, they have to be tested. And more or less, it's the same thing, Xiaolan, you have been talking about. Rasmus, can you also add to that so that we conclude?
Well, I agree very much. This is what I posed to the community, and I'm certainly a believer of that. What Abidun was talking about was a change in the research paradigm is necessary in order to achieve the things that he was mentioning. And I think we certainly need some creative destruction in terms of our research paradigm. So there are things that we need to get rid of and things that we need to develop. And some of those things that we need to get rid of are exactly as you mentioned, Petrina, some of those concepts that are very ill-equipped to identifying what Xiaolan is called and others are calling below the radar innovation. I mean, there's a lot of progress in terms of concepts. So talking about DUI forms of knowledge rather than SDI is a step in the right direction. But I think if we really want to change, so we can capture the full, to the extent it's possible, the full nature of the creativity, as it was put, then we need entirely new concepts, and that has to be some kind of inductive theory development, looking at what's going on the ground, trying to develop some theory from that. And I think AfricaLics would be the perfect host for that, and not just for organizing the research, but also collecting it in books and so on. So I think that should be written into the mission statement.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much.
If I may add quickly to what you have said and what Rasmus has said, of course, I'm agreeing with both of you, but I just want to say that to enable more effective policies to be formulated and implemented on our continent, it means that AfricaLics would have to draw closer to African governments. And so I'm looking to the day when we will be able to connect strongly at the continental level, connect with the African Union, and also within our country, so be better connected so we can contribute to ensuring an effective policy cycles in in governments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. We are over 4 minutes. I think it's not too bad. I'm not going to summarize anything. I just want to thank you very much, all the presenters, for very nice presentation. The questions were great from the participants. I think we all agree that we have learned. I personally have learned a lot. And yeah, sure. Let me remind again, I think we need to write a book on experiences of Africa on innovation or above the radar, because that is also important. We need both. Under the radar, we need more of that, but we cannot do only with the innovation under the radar. We need those above the radar. So both, and we need policies for that. With that final statement, so thank you once again.